Discover real stories of hope, healing, and redemption. Join us on a journey to overcome the odds and bring hope to the world, one story at a time. Every story has the power to inspire, restore, and uplift others. From personal struggles to triumphs, these journeys show how hope can transform lives. These aren't just stories. They're testimonies of resilience and the power of a fresh start. Welcome to the Repurposed podcast.
I think what we were saying was, do you see a difference in the issues that we face
Overseas
in America versus overseas based on the family dynamic?
Yes and no. That's kind of a loaded question.
Or are the issues overseas not due to family?
The issues overseas are sometimes not due to family. Think of really old school, like forced marriages and things like that, right? So one, you will have men with multiple wives being way more common in maybe an Islamic culture.
Right.
Not always the case, but in an Islamic culture. Two, you will see the love for the ideology as opposed to the family being more the case. Now, what does that mean? Without giving this girl's whole story away, when she became a Christian, her Muslim father tried to kill her. Hit her in the head with a machete. She blocked it with her arm, and she was able to get away. You don't generally see that here in Christian families, whether they're in drugs, whether they become an atheist, whether they become a Muslim. Now, people would tell you that. I've never seen it. I've seen the other side of it. So it doesn't mean that there might, we're like, oh, well, they judge me, they cast me out. Yeah, but they didn't hit you in the face with a machete. There's a big difference there, right? Now, that doesn't mean that casting somebody out or judging them or not showing them how much you love them as a family member is not important, because you have to show them the love of Christ. At the same time, if I have one daughter, and I don't have this, but if I have one daughter who is a heroin addict, and I have two more daughters that I'm trying to raise appropriately in the person of Jesus Christ, I still have to show that daughter that I love her.
Right.
But at some point in time, she cannot be a part of this family unit because she has chosen not to be a part of this family unit, because this family unit, I'm not going to let these girls become heroin addicts if I can. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
And so that's a hard dynamic. You see that overseas, but less of, I'm not letting these daughters become a heroin addict. No, we are not a family. We are Muslims. We are not a family. We are this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I would probably say the best closed off family group, and it doesn't matter what they necessarily believe, but would be Asian families within Japanese, Korean. That is probably the closest knit family I've seen, and that's setting aside the belief systems necessarily. Does that make sense? I don't know if that
just
makes
in the
sense.
dynamics of the family unit.
Of the family unit.
And a lot of them, what is it? You have the immediate family and the, what's the secondary? Like your aunts, uncles, grandparents. They are also a lot of times still living under the same roof. So it keeps
100%.
everything very close, very, like all the roles are kind of in place.
Yes, that's exactly right. Now, I'm not saying that you don't see that also in Middle Eastern, Islamic families. Jewish families are very tight-knit, and they do that very well. I mean, you look at Jewish people outside of the Islamic belief system, or the Islamic people assaulting Jewish families, there's not a lot of crime within from Jewish person to Jewish person. So when you go to Israel, you probably saw that. I know that I deal with that a lot of time. It's always from the outsiders in. So they are tight knit, yet they don't believe the same thing I believe, unless they're Messianic Jews. They don't have the same Christian beliefs. So see, it's not people would say that it is a Christian based thing. No, it's not. So it's definitely a family unit that's there. Now, when you're Christian-based, that's way better, because I believe that if you're not a Christian, you don't have eternal life with God through the person of Jesus Christ. So without getting too much into that, yes and no. One, yes, the family fixes much of the physical criminal problem, the physical issues that we see going on. What we see with Covenant Rescue Group, people being trafficked, the family fixes that. On the other side of it, it's not always the case overseas where the family is the great or the bad thing in that aspect. There is also the ideology that sometimes becomes the issue. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah,
It feels like that was
does.
a dumb answer, but hopefully
No, that
sense.
makes total sense. I'm trying to think because, well, and kind of taking it to even your military experience. So kind of having, when you moved over there, because you were born and raised in the States,
Yeah.
you know, you came from a family that was just hardworking, probably blue collar. Well, your dad was a pastor. When you joined the military, was that something you wanted to do?
Yeah, it was. Actually, was going to go to the Marine Corps, decided not to go to the Marine Corps, went to fire college, became a firefighter, and like 6 months later decided to go, they opened an opportunity to get a SEAL contract, wanted to go to the Navy to do the SEAL thing. So that was when I was 19.
So then once they started shipping you overseas, I mean, was that just kind of an aha moment, seeing the different dynamics and the ideologies? And was that something that you had to really kind of come to terms with while you were over there? Or?
No, because, well, when we were kids, when I was very little, when I remember it, so I was probably 5, my parents were missionaries in Turkey.
Okay.
So we grew up around, Turkish people. We grew up around Muslims. My dad was a missionary to Muslims, a Christian missionary to Muslims. So I did get to experience that at a very young age. I did get to see the difference in that. Now, that being said, one thing that we saw, those, even though they were Muslims, those women, and I cannot remember, I think the lady's name, we called her Dottie Faye, if I remember right. My mom could tell me. She
sounds like a Southern name.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
Dottie
that's right.
Faye.
Dottie Faye. She helped my mom. She was like a nanny there that helped my mom. And those Muslim women loving us as kids, that was different to see. They weren't Christians. We were missionaries to them. We were missionaries to the men. They didn't get to say much, right? That was the other thing. You don't get to say much as a woman in an Islamic society. There's some societies that push for that a little bit, but no.
Right.
Definitely not like here in the United States of America. And so they were very quiet compared to their men, and I remember that. Never hearing religious talks between them and my mom, other than whatever mom would put up. But they took care of the kids, and they loved us. They took care of us. And then they also, but they were very discipline-centric, right? They were not afraid to let us know we couldn't do something or pop our hand or pop our bottom, which is not necessarily the case here, but completely out of love for the child.
Right.
And so that was something I saw very much so, and probably still exists, that I even saw in the military.
Yeah.
And when I would go overseas in Islamic culture, which is where we primarily dealt with in the Middle East,
right,
is the motherly dynamic, the female dynamic that protected, that stood in and protected the child, even when the man would not stand in and protect the child because the ideology superseded the well-being of the child.
Right.
Does that make sense? And that was powerful to see. Whether it was right or wrong, I don't know, but that was neat to see. And I did see that as a child in Turkey, and I saw that as a man with the U.S. military in Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, those places.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier stories. You said maybe later on we can get into it when we were talking about the simplicity of why you felt so free while you were overseas, and you were talking about water. And give us a little bit of background and
water. Yeah.
Give us a little bit of a history and walk us through your time.
So I sat in a sniper hide one day. He's talking about the water aspect. Sat in a sniper hide one day. Long story short, we saw some guys coming out of town. They're doing a clearance and a KLE, a key leader engagement. And I was in a sniper hide. We set up about 3 a.m. as they started pushing through. And I want to say, well, put it this way, I wasn't on night vision. It was because the sun was up. Some guys came out of the town. We identified them as bad guys, and they start driving away on a motorcycle. And one of the snipers had a 300 Win Mag, and I said, hey, and these are the only guys we saw coming out of our side. Now, the other guys had been in gunfights. They had been in all kinds of everything you want to get into. They had been dealing with that on the other end, the northern end of the town. We're on the southern end of this. I think it was called Operation Big Country, if I remember right. I can't remember. They pushed out. These are the only guys we saw. Bad guys. They start taking off a motorcycle. I had a 50 caliber sniper, 50 BMG. McMillan TAC 50 is what it was. And Kel had a 300 Win Mag. And I said, Kel, shoot at those guys. with your 300 Win Mag while they're close. And as they get, if you miss while they're on the motorcycle, I'll shoot them as they get further away. So he shoots, and he did. He missed as they're driving away on with the 300 Win Mag out to about 1,700 yards, and that's when I started shooting. And we had moved our sniper hide to get to him, so I just had the 5 rounds that was in my gun, and I start hammering down, boom, boom. And these rounds are called Rothfuss rounds, so they explode when they hit. Mm-hmm. So it hits to the left of him, boom, explodes. It kind of goes, hits to the right of him. And so it was the last shot. I remember closing my eyes and saying, letting that breath out, opening my eyes. Because when you shoot, you get your natural point of aim.
Right.
Close my eyes, let my breath out, open my eyes, see where my natural point of aim is. Are my crosshairs on? Am I close enough to the mic for you, buddy? He keeps glaring at me. He's like, look at him leaning back. You know? Close my eyes, open my eyes. My breath had let out, natural point of aim. And I see that guy rolling into my crosshairs, the motorcycle. The dude that was on the back of it had already bounced off. It's just one guy. And I said, Cease, a guy named Greg Cisa, his team. I said, Cease, how far is that? He lazed it. He said, 2345, so 2,345 yards. And I was like, please, Lord, let it hit. I watched that big bullet go to the side. You can see it through your scope, the trace. In your own scope, sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't. But I watched it in my own scope. I remember watching that trace go right down to that guy. That guy bike flew over it, blew up behind him. And I thought, it looked like the trace went over top of the guy. What I found out later is as the guy lay there, what the trace had actually done, because they cleared to him and found out, and the guy was calling red. The trace actually went through his hips right here. So I shot him through his hips.
Right.
With that 50 BMG bullet. Went through his hips, went through the gas tank of the bike, blew up on the other side. He fell over. So he lay there. He was alive for a little while. He was calling for a doctor, calling for a mechanic. He just laid there and bled out. He died. Right. They found him. So my furthest kill was 2,345 yards. Shot him to the motorcycle. And they cleared to him. They found his IED material, his gun, all this stuff that he had, where he was trying to go. And we kind of liberated that little village or those 2 villages from the Taliban in that day. I say to say, that was the most exciting thing we had happen that whole time. So we got in that sniper hide at 3 a.m, smoked that dude at around 6 or 7. The sun was up, but the sun had not been up long, 6 or 7 a.m. And it wasn't super hot, but it was getting warmer, okay? That's when that happened. We stayed in the sniper hide until 9 o'clock that evening. And that day, all I remember, so if you look at my watch right here, I got all kinds of stuff going on my watch, but it would have temperature. My watch died. We took a picture of a buddy of mine's watch. And I won't say his name because he won't want me to, because he still works for 3-letter agencies. Took a picture of his watch that day. It's at 136 degrees. So when I was thinking about water, the reason I mentioned that, we are up there all day, dipped all of our snuff, drank whatever water we had, which normally did not carry a lot of water, normally carried a lot of ammo and a lot of dip. Dipped our Copenhagen. Yeah, that's right. Dipped our Copenhagen.
Water, who needs that?
Ate our beef jerky. Yeah, we'd carry about a liter, maybe 2 of water. Copenhagen, jerky, water's gone. And we sat on that hide side all day at 136 degrees. You could not move. Wherever you moved to would be so hot you couldn't sit on it. So like wherever you finally stayed at, that's pretty much where you laid. Otherwise, the rock was so hot.
Right.
And I remember looking down at the river, though, down there, just being so dehydrated and so hot. Of course, we're dehydrated because we're dipping Copenhagen and we're not drinking water. And I'm sitting up there just thinking, oh, God, that water looks so good. And I could smell the river.
Right.
I could smell the river.
The temptation.
But it's like 1,000 meters away, but I can still smell it so good. So that's what I mean when I say, when we have so much stuff here. We've never been in that position. Well, there are people in those places overseas where they literally are dying of not having water.
Right.
So I can't imagine, for me, the most dehydrated I've ever been in those sniper hides, not being able to get water, being out of water. A lot of times self-induced dehydration, but being able to smell the water that you see, or when rain hits you, when it rains, and just like reprieve.
Right.
There are people overseas who don't have that at all. So anyway, all that being said, that was what I was talking about earlier.
So
was that day.
Okay, that day. Okay, because you intrigued me with that. So I was like, okay, I've got to circle back and find out what that story is.
One thing that happened so early in the morning. And we celebrated. Oh, yeah, smoked that dude at, 2,300 yards. And drink all our water, dip all our snuff, and we're still sitting
still
there.
Couldn't move.
Just still sitting in that same spot, can't move until 9:00 that night. And it was 136 degrees.
Right.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
What do you feel like is the biggest, like, now when you went into the military, was it what you were expecting?
That's actually a really good question. Yes and no. I don't know what I thought the SEAL teams was going to be, but it wasn't as. Was it great in combat deployments? Yes. Was it great when combat was not going on? No. And so that was kind of it. So yes
right.
and no. The combat side, yes. No combat side, no.
Now, how many years were you?
8. So I was in the SEAL teams for 6 years and started at about 6.5 years, was looking at, hey, should I get out? Should I not? When I went through a medical process to look at getting out, they found I had type 1 diabetes.
Okay.
And that totally, you can't be a SOCOM or JSOC operator and have type 1 diabetes or be insulin dependent, which came from the anthrax vaccine. But the other side of it was I could be in the regular Navy and still be insulin dependent. So they were looking at, you want to be a sniper school instructor for the rest of your time? Do you want to, do you want to go to the regular Navy, be an intel officer, so as I'm looking at all this stuff, I'm like, no, I don't want to do either of those. I don't want to be a non-deployable SEAL. So we start the out process. The problem is the Navy doesn't want to med retire you out when you're insulin dependent. But the SEAL teams, I could not be a SEAL and be insulin dependent. So what they did is they lumped everything together and wound up getting med retirement. But I broke my back a few times in the teams, broke my neck once, had a few knee surgeries, had 14 TBIs, so all of that. So all of that stuff added together is what gave me my med retirement. Or
now,
my
were you
medical?
Were you ready to leave? Like, were you like, okay, I'm at peace with this, or were you kind of sad to go?
I was sad to go, and to be honest with you, if it wasn't for the medical thing and going through that process of that, really 1.5 year process to that 8-year point, before I got my final stuff to get out, I would have went right back in.
Right.
The only thing that I'd done, and I'd screened positive for development group, which is what everybody calls SEAL Team 6. I'd screened positive from the West Coast for that. What they do is they take you through like a board where you talk to people and you do like this psychological examination. I think it's called what's the test? Briggs and something or other y'all might know. Myers-Briggs, yeah. So you do like a Myers-Briggs test. I don't necessarily think it was Myers-Briggs, but it was very similar to that. So you do that, and then you talk to people, and then you swim, whatever, to make sure you can still do whatever they wanted you to do. I can't remember what it was, like 1,000 meters, maybe it's a half mile in 10 minutes or 12 minutes or something like that, and run 3 miles in 21 minutes and do your 20 pull-ups and all that crap, right? So you do your development group screener. So you do all that stuff. And so I went through that process that you probably can hear guys talk about online to go to Green Team. And they said, okay, my chief sat me down and said, you can go to Green Team. But if you're going to get out, you need to get out because you're going to take somebody else's slot to go to Green Team. So that's when I said, okay, I'm going to look at the Navy Reserve route to get out and come over. So I wasn't necessarily sure. So if I'm being honest, the thing that I regret is not staying to at least go to Green Team. Since I, did screen positive to go to Green Team. Doesn't necessarily mean you'll make it through Green Team, because like when I went through sniper school, I think they said it was a 70% attrition rate or 65% attrition. So it's only SEALs in our sniper school, and 65% of SEALs don't make it through SEAL sniper school. Same thing with Green Team. You go, I think they say it's about a 60 or 70% attrition rate. So it's all SEALs to go over to development group. And of those SEALs, 60 to 70% don't make it through Green Team, if I remember right. So it is very, that is probably the one regret. However, because of what happened to me with the med retirement, I probably would not have made it through Green Team and would have started that process then. They would have found the diabetes then, which led to getting all the other stuff to get out.
Right.
Now, I'm not the only one with broken backs or knee surgeries and TBIs. There's dudes that are still operating that have all that.
Right.
Because that doesn't necessarily make you have to leave the SEAL teams.
Right.
That was just what they used to give me that full 100% or that full medical process out.
Right. Yeah. Well, looking back, saying that, I should have, if there was one regret, I should have done this. How do you process that? Because ultimately, you didn't go that route. Yeah. It brought you back to the States, back to Alabama at some point. How did you process that feeling of, man, did I miss out on something?
Like I said, I'm not a super deep thinker when it comes to stuff like that. Like don't cry over spilled milk.
Right.
So I don't know if it's necessarily a process sort of thing. I mean, it's like, all right, so that would have been the top level of what you could be in the SEAL teams, is to go to development group. At the same time, I have a lot of buddies at development group, and they're like, hey man, one of my buddies, when he graduated that green team class, I had just graduated from the law enforcement academy here and was still in that medical process time. He stopped at my house and saw me on his way to Virginia Beach, and he's still in. I talked with him not long ago, and I was asking about it. He's like, he said, yeah, it's super cool. He said, obviously I'm not at a squadron yet, but going through green team was super cool, and it's cool to be there. He said, but I'm not going to necessarily say you're missing out on anything.
Right.
That's what he said. And I've talked to him since then. And again, guys will say, yeah, super cool, but also being out is super cool too, because you don't work for the government anymore. So,
but and then you stayed active at some point. Yeah. That's what brought you to starting Covenant Rescue Group. So it's not like you just went home and settled into a life of like
drinking,
drinking or hunting all the time. Which is I think from what I've heard, though, you did have a little bit. You allowed yourself a season,
I did,
to enjoy some
hunting,
connecting with friends and family. But then ultimately, it led you to. I think you did a brief job in between. Then maybe
I worked full time for 1 year as a law enforcement officer till like 2014, and I don't think it was 2014 till I got my final decision from the VA, from the Navy, got my retirement IDs, got the whatever it is, the Navy retirement medical insurance for my family and all that. So that was still, and during that process, I was going through also becoming a law enforcement officer, being a law enforcement officer, and when I had done that for a year, the Lord opened the doors for me to get into anti-human trafficking work.
Right.
And finish my MBA, which is why I left full-time law enforcement, ran my business, finished my MBA, and started doing anti-human trafficking work.
So you got the education part, kind of got some that helps towards Covenant Rescue. You had the experience. So what was the moment that led you into saying, hey, you know what, I want to combine this. I want to do Covenant Rescue Group.
Yeah, so started the business, the Shooting Institute. I still teach now for the SEAL teams. I actually have a pistol carbine trainer for SEAL Team 10, I think it is, coming up. So I still am able to do that. Still teach for DOD, and all that with the tactics, CQB. Did that for law enforcement. Maintained my law enforcement status. And when I, probably about halfway through my MBA, met some people, or was able to start the idea of, hey, this is how we do a nonprofit. Met with my CPA, took me through the process, and we started the nonprofit in 2019.
So did y'all know someone that had been affected by human trafficking? Like you and your wife kind of together kind of talking about this being an issue, just news, hearing issues that were going on. And isn't there like a highway that runs between Atlanta and crosses through Birmingham, and it's a pretty serious issue?
65, 22, 2059, all that. It's kind of, Birmingham just kind of as a hub of where you go to Atlanta, to Nashville, to Knoxville.
Right.
Coming from Texas, where you can cross the border, going out to California, going all the way up the eastern seaboard.
Wow.
Into whether you're going into like Indianapolis and even, in Chicago, or going up to, DC, Virginia Beach, those areas.
So really the South is kind of a hub.
The South is a hub, but Birmingham really is a hub that goes, because of where you can span off to, coming from Jackson, Mississippi, from the border to Atlanta. So it is a hub that goes to Atlanta, DC, New York, Pittsburgh, any of those areas. You're going to have to pretty much pass through Birmingham unless you stay the South Alabama side, which takes you up into Georgia and Atlanta that way. So Birmingham is a hub.
And that's wild to think that that's going on in our backyard.
Oh, yeah.
So the fact that you created Covenant Rescue Group, is such a needed thing, not only for the world, but specifically our community.
Oh, yeah. Well, and so here's how you look at it. Without going too much on one side. You do have the sex exploitation, the sex work side, which, for all intents and purposes, you can find human trafficking, but is not always human trafficking.
Right.
Every woman that you see who's in her 20s or 30s selling herself or being sold is not always being trafficked.
Right.
However, there are those in that arena who are being trafficked. However, what I have come to see over our duration is that any female who finds herself in that arena, let's say she's in her 20s or 30s and is in the sex work arena, whether she's being exploited or not, at some point in time as a child has been a victim of sex exploitation.
Okay.
I have almost, maybe not always, but I have almost always seen that be the case. Now, when that is the case, when it is a child who is being victimized via sex or labor, whatever, it is always trafficking.
Okay.
So by the definition of law, federal, state, and kind of what we know is human trafficking, if a child's involved, it's always trafficking.
Right.
If an adult's involved, it might be trafficking, it might not. That takes a further level of investigation. So what we do is we focus strictly on child exploitation, because when we see those who are exploiting children, we find also those who are exploiting of-age people.
Right.
And we also start to nip it in the bud so that if we can figure these out who are exploiting children or find these children who are being exploited, hopefully we start to deal with the process before they get to the point to where even if they're not being sold, even if they're not being trafficked, we've dealt with that and started offering them the things so that they're not necessarily selling themselves, because guess what? They went through that trauma at a young age and never were able to effectively deal with it, never effectively able to get out of it. So now that's what they do when they're older, when they're in their 20s or 30s.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So do you see a difference with all that going on in the States versus internationally? Do you see more of a coaxing, or is it lifestyle that kind of, because I think some of it's not even just being, especially in the States, I mean, some of it can be where kids have found themselves through lifestyle, like social media, gaming, where they've kind of been entered into this world where it's almost like they're lullabying them into that environment. Yeah. Whereas overseas, maybe like families have had to, because of desperation, thinking they're doing a good thing by selling their children or giving their children for a better life. You know what I'm saying?
There's that aspect of it. So a lot of times, let's say when you're in a war-torn area, okay, you might have a mother who, regardless of what anybody says, and I like to use Ukraine as an example because I know that's where that has taken place, especially more recently with Ukraine and Russia. Ukrainian men off fighting, off dying, and the Ukrainian men have taken an unbelievably, which that doesn't mean that women and children are not being killed in that process too, but the Ukrainian men have taken an unbelievable burden of fighting the attrition war with Russia, which they lose because there's more Russian men able to come and fight than there are Ukrainian men able to go and fight, just strictly by the numbers. And because of that, you do see that being a problem where you might have an of-age Russian female who's got to take care of the kids and the family. So what will she do? Oftentimes they will put themselves in a position to be trafficked, where they are trafficked, to protect and to feed and to effectively take care of those children. So you do see that in war-torn areas. You see that in Africa very commonly. So you see that. You also see parents who are in such dire straits where they will sell that child thinking that this is a better. So that's it's like, how bleak is their life? How bad is it
get to
that
think
point that not for financial gain, not for my drug fix, which is what we see here in the U.S. We will see people selling their kids for their own self. That's a whole different thing. I'm talking, you have parents who literally have no light, no hope to think that this individual over here says they're going to take my kids and take them to the United States of America, take my kids and make sure that they have a better life here. Oh, and by the way, I'll give you $100. I'll give you $20. Oftentimes,
so they're almost paying.
No, not almost. They are. Okay. Oftentimes, they are paying someone to take their child,
thinking that they're doing a like benefiting their kid.
Because it's so bad here, you're going to make my life better. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes they do get paid to give their child up to a better life, but a lot of times they are paying someone to take their child.
Man.
Sorry, bro, that's my
cellular device.
That's right.
Well, so then with Covenant Rescue, since y'all do a lot nationally and internationally, what would you say are the top areas that y'all focus on the most? Like, what is it that y'all do to help combat this? And what can viewers, like as we're listening to this, what are ways that we can help in the fight against this? And what are ways that we could hinder y'all's fight on trying to, in a perfect world, it would be great to think that we could completely do away with this issue.
And you can't do away with it. So child exploitation is primarily what we focus on. And the reason is because, like I said earlier, it's always human trafficking when a child is being exploited, whether through sex, whether through labor, whether through the organ harvesting aspect, or what. When a child's being exploited, however that looks, primarily focus on sex exploitation because that's the easiest thing to target.
Right.
But whenever a child's being exploited, it is human trafficking. So, and when you find that child being exploited and you find that individual who would exploit a child, you generally see them
all the other things.
You see them exploiting whether they're, adults, whether they're running, males or females who are of age through labor, through work, through sex, through whatever, right? So that would be the first thing. The second thing, or the second aspect of it, is for stateside, the family. God, and I talked about it for like an hour before he yelled at us for going too long. Saying, the family unit, the nuclear family being the most important thing to target. That I think I use this, and there's a bunch of these freaking guys that were like, oh, what's this guy mean? He's trying to be so alpha. No, that's not it.
Right.
I'm not saying I'm the baddest dude in the world because I am not. I'm not going to get in a cage with a UFC fighter when I can shoot them in the face or hit them in the face with my hatchet if they come into my house to mess with my kids. What I am saying is that if you are a husband, if you are a father, you better be able and be willing to do the most gruesome things to anyone who would go after your child. Because if you present that, it doesn't mean that you completely do away with the fact that somebody might try to take your kid, but you definitely mitigate it. So that's what everybody asks. How can we start to combat human trafficking? Make sure that the nuclear family is intact.
If the father is there.
If you're a father, make sure that you're a threat to anyone who would mess with your kids. And I just did some podcasts recently where I said that, and these guys are like, oh, what do you mean? Well, if you're wondering what I mean, then you're the problem I'm talking about.
Right.
Because that means you're not a threat enough to make sure that somebody's not going to target your kids.
Yeah.
To be a deterrent. And the example I use, I rarely use his name, but I will say it right now so people can research this to know that I'm not throwing some random thing out that's not true. If you look at Jack Reynolds, who's a very notorious, you can YouTube. She can YouTube him right now, a very notorious sex predator, primarily focused on boys. I think he was primarily looking at boys as his target. However, I do believe he did girls, and I believe it was not necessarily a demographic based.
Right.
Like it was like, hey, Hispanics, whites, blacks. But from where he was at, from my understanding, primarily a white demographic. However, that was not what he was looking at.
Right.
He would look at a bunch of things, but he said the one thing that would always deter him, and if you look up any of his interviews, you'll see this. The one thing that would always deter him is that he would look at the father. If the father appeared to be a threat, he would not approach that child. And that's exactly what he said.
Right.
So as a father, why not be a threat?
Right. Why not?
If that's the one deterrent needed.
To protect your kid.
To protect your kid from this guy who's saying, hey, he was a very notorious sex predator.
Right. I mean, he's giving us insight.
And so that to me was just so eye-opening and condemning for what we do, is to say, wow, if that's what they're looking at, well, then I better be a threat. And that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be some roided out freak who's just some muscle. No, that doesn't mean anything at all, because look at Butterbean. That dude wasn't nothing. Y'all know what I'm talking about, Butterbean, right? That dude wasn't nothing but some big fat dude who would knock everybody out when it came to getting into, whether it was UFC or whether it was boxing or whether it was the tough man competitions. That dude would get in there and wear dudes out, and dudes couldn't. But he wasn't some big in shape dude. He was just a big fat guy from Jasper, Alabama.
Right.
You know, and so it's not necessarily, which it should be. It could be an appearance aspect of it.
Right.
Do you look threatening? But it also, what it really means is, are you involved? Are you in tune? Or
are you present?
Is this you?
Right.
Where your kids are on the playground,
right?
You know, over here, you know, or are you very apathetic and affable to let some guy say or do whatever he wants to do to your child? You know, that's really what it means.
Well, and I remember my mom even telling me, like, just as I'm growing up and getting older and, you know, becoming a woman and stuff, they say a lot of times predators will look and see, what is the condition you are in? Are you coming out of a store on your phone? Mm-hmm. Do you look tired? Do you have kids on your hip where you just look worn out, where you couldn't put up a fight? And then for kids, is the dad around? Is he present? Do you see him? Or is it usually the kids just off running around, mom just being the one that's having to protect, provide, and nurture?
Yep.
And she can't do it all.
So that's exactly it. So when my wife walks out, I say, like, for her with 3 girls, if she comes out of the store, which we try not to make that just for the ease of shopping, right? We try to, like, if she wants to go to the store, she will take the kids, but sometimes she tries to plan it around when I'm home from work, or if I'm able to be there, and she'll go do her thing, right? Or they'll do the delivery or whatever, just because it's a hassle with the kids. However, if you look like a dumpster fire as a mother with kids, which is oftentimes what it is. And my wife with 3 girls,
because it's easy to be like that.
Guys will not. They're not going to even. They're not going to even look at that. Why? Because there's too much going on.
Okay.
That's too hard of a target.
Right.
However, it's what you just mentioned, where maybe it's a dumpster fire, but maybe it's a dumpster fire not because it's just the nature of being a mom with 3 kids and a buggy and groceries and looking for my keys and really being, but it's a dumpster fire because you're trying to be in tune with everything.
Yeah, you're distracted.
Not let anybody run into traffic. Oh, this one's falling out of the buggy. Oh, we just dropped the bread out of the buggy, whatever it is, right? Because she's in tune. She's got her stuff going. It looks rough, but she's keeping it all in that dumpster.
Right.
That is a dumpster fire.
Yeah.
As opposed,
a contained dumpster fire.
Exactly, right? It's just burning right here in the dumpster, as opposed to this kid's been able to go off here to this aisle by themselves 3 times.
Right.
And I've noticed that. Not because mama's keeping it contained, whether she can or not, but because she's on her phone, because she's not paying attention. Oh, this child is not screaming or crying a whole lot, but they're over here sneaking these and stealing candy in the store. Mm-hmm. That's what they look for. That's what they notice. So anyway, I say that to say that's, or again, is dad involved?
Right.
Is dad just letting this go on? Is dad never there? And something else that same guy said, Jack Reynolds, he said, hey, I would also befriend the mother, get to know, hey, let me help you out, you know, and if he could build rapport with a single mom at some point in time, she feels comfortable with him and said, hey, look, why don't you go out and just take care of yourself?
Yeah.
Because this lady is on the edge of the cliff every day.
Right.
So guess what? If this guy builds rapport and she feels any trust, not that she means anything to furnish or for her kids, she's like, you know what? Yeah,
I trust him to watch the kids.
Let me take care of the kids. That's what he said he would do. Let me take care of the kids. And you just go out and have a coffee. Have some time to yourself. She'd be like, you know what? Yeah, that'd be great. And he would come over and watch the kids, and that's how he could groom children. So again, the father, a huge aspect of that, a huge piece.
And most likely a father's not going to be like, oh yeah, let some man watch the kids.
No,
or even women, because you find women kind of involved and can be involved, probably not as much as men, in child trafficking and
oh yeah, you could, absolutely.
But just so being a present father, being an intentional parent, not being distracted, or even if you have had a hard day, come off confident, walk out without just feeling like you're like where someone who might be a predator isn't seeing you as weak.
100%. And I don't necessarily, you don't have to be the hero dad who is some super alpha working out all, because because I'm not that.
Right.
Like I'm literally at home.
Well, not right because you're not that.
Yeah,
just right that you don't have to be like that.
Yeah, you don't have to be that. Well, like right. Me, I'm at home and we're playing dress up. We're watching Bluey on the couch.
Right.
But, look at my fingernails, Dad, doing all this, and I'm not necessarily, I don't paint my fingernails or nothing like that. And I don't let my girls paint my fingernails. Mm-hmm. I just don't do that. However, you just have to be there.
Right.
That's what it means.
Be seen.
Be a deterrent. Mm-hmm. That's what a threat is. That's what we mean by be a threat.
Right.
Mean that if some dude shows up and say, hey, let me watch your kids, you're like, nah, bro, no. You're not going to watch my kids.
We're covered.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually what that means. And that's powerful.
Right.
That if you're a dad and some dude feels comfortable enough to talk to your wife, number one. There ain't no dude who's comfortable enough to talk to my wife that ain't a very close friend or a brother. Right. One of my brothers. If the dude's comfortable enough to talk to your wife and say, let me take the kids off your hands, you got a problem. That means you're not a threat. If a dude's comfortable enough to come over and even ask you, hey man, look, why don't you and mama go out for a little bit? Let me watch the kids. That's a problem.
Right.
And even if they're not a brother, a friend, or like I got a buddy that lives down the street. He's got daughters my daughter's age. Well, of course I let my girls go down to their house and play, even if it's just him there, because I know him. He's like they were at the house eating dinner the other night, and vice versa. He'll let his girls come over and play with us. I'm not talking about that.
Right.
I'm talking about
someone you don't have a long history with.
There you go. Those are the ones who start trying to, and then people who you do have a long history with, you still have to constantly make sure that you know what's going on.
Right.
So that's
So with Covenant Rescue Group, what are ways, how can, the listeners, the Repurposed podcast, whoever, A, how can we help y'all? And B, what are ways that we may, as viewers, hinder y'all in y'all's work?
Yeah.
Because I think that's important, because we have a younger audience who, they want to see justice served. They want to be active. They want to help. But sometimes that help can maybe hinder a sting or an operation that y'all are doing.
One, if you're a believer, pray. If you're not a believer, ask the Lord to reveal himself to you, being the person of Jesus Christ. I promise it will, and you can choose to accept him or deny him. So if you're a believer, the person of Jesus Christ, pray for our success, for our support, because God provides it. Two, if you have the ability to financially support what we do is we provide training and operational support for law enforcement agencies, both federal and state and local, like municipalities. Here where we're sitting at in Birmingham, we're doing one next week for a local agency right here in the Birmingham area to help them out. And we go all over the nation and do this. So that costs money to teach these agencies how to effectively figure these things out. So let's say that there is an individual who's targeting kids, and let's say it's that single mom who is just literally at her wit's end and needs help. And there's that guy who was willing to step in, not as a good dude, but is stepping in to groom and target these kids. We teach agencies how to target them. And I love that word target. Let me go ahead and tell you, there's a lot of cops that don't like that word target. There's a lot of politicians that don't like that word target. No, that's a very good word to use because they are targeting your kids. We want to teach agencies how to target them. Right. That is the bottom line. And so if you have the ability to financially help us do that, then do that. Donate. Go online. Mail in checks. Support us. Buy swag. Hey, there's a lot of people like buying T-shirts and stuff. Buy swag. That supports our mission because all of it goes to our operations or to paying our guys that can go in and help agencies perform these operations. And the final piece, which is an important question you asked, how can you hinder? How do you hinder? So many vigilante groups are out there. It's so easy to get on there and be able to chat somebody in who is going to show up to buy or even sell a kid. That doesn't help us because who cares if I can show up and wag a phone in their face and put their face on that camera right there and say, look at this guy was going to have sex with a 12-year-old. Look at the message he was sending.
And I've seen that all over TikTok, all over, social media.
It's symbolism without substance. Because unless that individual really is that person and you're willing to kill them right there, you've done nothing. And by kill them right there, I mean actually physically kill them or appropriately do it so you can have a successful arrest, prosecution and sentencing.
Right.
All you did was make that person smarter. And then the last side of that, and what we see more often than not with these vigilante groups, is when they show up to do that, a lot of times, the guys that they are chatting in, they have some mental, when I say legitimate mental issue, I'm talking, my wife gets mad at me. I've got a buddy whose daughter has Down syndrome. And you know how you can look and tell if a person has Down syndrome because they look different. That's his daughter. So I'll oftentimes say Down syndrome, and that's not what I mean, because his daughter has that, and that's the first thing that pops in my head. It's not Down syndrome. It is
maybe autism.
Autism.
Okay.
It's autism. It's like the Rain Man guy, right? It's autism, because oftentimes they have that going. And we saw that recently. Had a lady reach out. This guy's reaching out to my daughter, and her daughter had Down syndrome. Oh. She said, he's kind of targeting her. Now, her daughter was also in her 20s, but she lived with her. She was taking, and she's chatting back. Well, we dig into this guy. This guy was not like 19 or 20, but he had autism.
Oh my gosh.
He also had a mental disability. So you have to be careful with that. The one that I think of the most, it's kind of funny what they made him do. They made this guy drink his own pee, but what they find out is this guy was autistic.
Oh, gosh.
So they basically just showed up, tricked an autistic kid, tuned him up a little bit, and made him drink his own pee. It's like, come on, guys. You're not actually doing... You're not creating justice. You're victimizing somebody.
Right.
And you're also putting yourself in a position where guess who's going to get taken to jail when you beat up an autistic kid and make him drink his own pee? You are.
And that's why it's so important to fund and support groups like Covenant Rescue Group, because y'all are going to do the due diligence of really discovering, are these people a threat? Mm-hmm. And like you said, if you find someone who targets children, then that's just the root. Or if they're willing to do that, they're willing to do all these other things. So you're really putting in the time to investigate these people, the cases, and then tee it up for a fair and effective trial.
That's right. We teach law enforcement agencies how to do it, because the ones that, and this is where we find it most, when we start those chats or start that communication, the agency that's local, like oftentimes they will say, hey, hang on. No, we know who that is. Like they know because they're at the local level. They deal with them. So this is probably not the first time they've dealt with this. So they call this one guy who knows this guy's mom who, guess what? Yeah, that guy right there. Yeah, he's in his mid-20s and he does this, but he's autistic.
Okay.
That looks a whole lot different, because now we don't try to bring him in to buy somebody or try to, it means it's got to be dealt with. It doesn't mean it's a good thing, because even if they're autistic, you don't want them going after your kids.
There still can be damage done,
yes. So you make sure that it's appropriately dealt with, because that's now not a criminal act. There's another issue going on there. So that's why we work with the local agencies, and they generally help us figure that out. So when somebody shows up, we have everything we need on them.
Right.
We have a solid felony case built. So when they're arrested, not only do they get prosecuted, and right now we're 100% on prosecutions for all, I think we have 167 that we work with agencies for the last 12 months. It might be the last 18 months, 167 felony arrests across the nation with law enforcement agencies. And I think like 130 of them have met their disposition. They've already gone through the process where you've had successful arrest, successful prosecution, and successful sentencing. And what comes out of that is, I'll give this for instance, somebody that we helped in this process arrest showed up for a 14-year-old girl. When he's successfully arrested, he starts the successful prosecution, and guess what? They get a warrant, and they take all of the stuff off of his phone, and they find out he's having sex with his own 18-month-old daughter.
Oh, my gosh.
Making videos of it, pictures of it, producing child porn and selling child porn. Now, guess who gets involved? The FBI gets involved in that, because they're really good at tracking down the child porn thing, buddy. They start running with it. So the reason I say that is it leads to these other cases when it's done appropriately. So when you go out and you do this stuff on your own, it doesn't help what needs to be done. And that's a successful law enforcement operation to target these individuals so you can actually find the victims. Because if somebody just shows up and says, hey, I got this guy right here, look at that camera, this guy was showing up for a 14-year-old girl. What they never got and what they don't know is that this guy was having sex with his 18-month-old daughter. And when he's not arrested, you know what he does? He goes back home to her and he goes quiet.
Right.
He's like that.
Because he knows he's on the radar.
My man wearing the baggy shirt right there. As soon as you try to bag that buck and you shoot an arrow at him, or you shoot a bullet at him and you miss, will you ever see that buck again, bro? No, you ain't seeing that buck again.
Right.
He gets smart, he disappears. That's what that guy does. He gets smart, he disappears, and he continues to victimize that 18-month-old. He continues to victimize that grown lady that he's got locked up in his closet, which we've had happen too. He continues to victimize somebody else, and you never catch him.
So you almost are working for the predator 100%. Versus for the law enforcement.
You're working for the predator, and sometimes you are the predator because you just tricked an autistic kid and showing up and you know, messing him up. And guess what? You are now going to go to jail because you just assaulted an autistic kid.
Right, just too messy.
Too messy.
So leave it to the experts.
I would say that, or leave it to law enforcement, because even if they're not doing a good job, and even if sometimes they're doing the wrong thing, it will be found out.
So what would be the normal course of action if you're thinking you've been witness to something that needs to be reported? Do you report it to law enforcement, and then they'll come to y'all or the different organizations for support? And you
could report it to us too, and we could take it to law enforcement. Or sometimes law enforcement agencies will tell us, "Hey, man, we know y'all. We know you're good. We want you to. Can you take this for us?" And then we'll. If there's anything to it, we can make sure that it goes the route it needs to go. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Because that's the other thing too. A lot of times, a lot of people think there's something to something, but there's nothing to it. No, there's just nothing to it. Regardless of whether you want to believe it is or not, there's nothing to it.
Right.
The other side of it is because of the civil aspect of marriage unions, the ease of divorce nowadays. You'll have a husband, you'll have a wife who, and they start making these accusations
against each other.
And that becomes a very precarious situation too. So just because you're friends with this lady and she's saying, I know he did this, this, and this.
Right.
This guy never did that.
Wow.
There's nothing to show he ever did it. And so it really becomes a civil issue that can get nasty. But this dude's not actually doing this, or vice versa.
Right.
This guy's saying my wife was doing this, this, and this. When in reality, he found out she was cheating on him, and he's upset, so he's trying to burn her. Doesn't mean that she did the right thing.
Character assassination.
That's it. Character assassination. And so we see a lot of that going on too with these as well.
But y'all figured out ways to kind of investigate, process, and be able to rule out those while still.
It's not very hard to figure out. I mean, it's really not. It's not like I said, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I'm not a deep thinker. If it was too hard to figure out, it's really not very hard to figure out.
Still 2 + 2 is 4.
That's right.
It doesn't take much to figure it out.
Doesn't take much to see, is this really what they say it is? It doesn't mean that stuff can't slip through the cracks, because it does. But for the most part, a lot of what we see, very quickly we can look at it and assess and do a quick investigation to see, is this really what's taking place?
Man. This is so interesting. I want to have you back on because I feel like we were able to kind of touch on military, but most importantly, Covenant Rescue Group. And I would love to hear more of the ins and outs of that. But what would be, so we'll have to bring you back on for that, but what would be any last minute items that you think, or do you feel like we've touched it, but to leave myself, the listeners with?
One, if you don't know Jesus, ask him to reveal himself to you. Or if you don't know God, ask him to reveal himself to you to be in the person of Jesus Christ, and you can choose to accept him or deny him. I encourage you to accept him.
Yes.
And I say that to you, the listener, because I know you're a sister in Christ, but I say that to you, the listener. If you do know Christ, share him unashamedly with the world around you, because it doesn't matter what you do, how great it is, how much money you have, how little you have. It doesn't matter, because at some point in time, you're going to step into eternity. And I promise you this, you're going to be dead a whole lot longer than you were alive. Right? Dead is for eternity. Eternity matters. Eternity in the person of Jesus Christ is what really matters. So that's the first thing I encourage you to do. The second thing with Covenant Rescue Group and what we do, pray for us, fund us, support us, get swag, spread the word, share the word. And then finally, if you're a parent, which we really hit on a lot. I think we've probably been going 2 hours. Am I close? 2 hours. That's right. That's fair. My dad's a Southern Baptist pastor, so I come by it honestly right now.
It's in his genetics.
No. So if you're a parent, just like we were talking about beforehand, be intentional with your kids. Be a threat to those who are targeting them and would be a threat to them, because they are out there, regardless of whether you want to believe it or not. There are people out there who want nefarious things for your children. Don't let them take them. And you can do that, and we haven't talked much about it, but you can do that by being very in tune with what they do with these right here, these devices, their games, any technology. They're your kids. They're not your friends.
Right.
Doesn't mean you can't be friendly, but it does mean that you are their parents. Be their parents. Protect them. Provide for them. Do the things that are necessary to make sure that somebody's not going to try to take them, steal their mind with that device, steal their body if they show up to your house to take them. Protect your children. And if you can do that, that's how we can start to end human trafficking. Because guess what? These nefarious players, they're gonna be like, dang, look at all these families buckled up over here.
Right.
We can't get in. It's buttoned up tight. So that's my encouragement.
Focus on the family.
Focus on the family. There you go.
Old school.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for
having me. And I hope to have you back.
Yes, ma'am. Anytime.
If
Let
you're
me know.
willing. All right.
I'm not far away. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.